12 countries signed a radical pact to create NATO, in theory, a defensive alliance, but before it was attacked, it was already bombing Yugoslavia. For 78 days, it launched massive airstrikes without UN approval. Article 5 was not activated. No one had attacked its members, and yet it began to act with a hidden purpose that would not be discovered until years later. It was 1949. The Soviet Union was already extending its dominance over half of Europe, imposing its communist regime with an iron fist. The scars of the Second World War were still open, but while the world was trying to heal, the most powerful people from the United States, United Kingdom, France, and other countries were meeting with something else in mind. The NATO Pact that would allow them to intervene and expand their influence beyond their own borders. Their mysterious intervention continued with Afghanistan, where they stayed for 20 years, and Libya, where a coordinated attack overthrew the government in weeks, but left the country on the brink of chaos, and everything pointed in the same direction. Contrary to what many believed, after the fall of the Soviet Union, NATO only became stronger. It went from 12 original countries to 31 in 2024, becoming one of the organizations that decides the course of humanity. On September 11th, 2001, NATO activated its most powerful mechanism, Article 5. That day, the United States suffered the most devastating terrorist attack ever seen. And thanks to that article, which put all the countries of the agreement to fight together under the same cause, a new war was unleashed. This time against a much more elusive enemy, international terrorism. Tired of the world's fate being decided in closed rooms, the countries of the South took note and copied the formula of power with their own hidden objective. BRICS did not arise from wars, and the shared frustration of always being sidelined led them to make three important decisions. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa joined forces under the acronym BRICS. But what began as a marketing label for emerging markets became a real political and economic bloc. Today, these countries cover more than 26% of the Earth's surface and more than 40% of the world's population. And although their political systems could not be more different, they all share one goal: to break the Western monopoly on global power. They have created their own bank, proposed trading in local currencies, and even discussed expanding membership. However, they also carry internal contradictions. While Russia bombs Ukraine, within the BRICS another battle is brewing. India and Brazil quietly distance themselves from Putin, and China plays its own chess game. The bloc that was born to challenge the West now risks breaking from within. In 2023, BRICS surprised the world by inviting new countries like Egypt, Iran, and Argentina to join. A gesture that not only seeks to expand its influence, but also to consolidate its narrative as a counterbalance to the G7. In the mid-1970s, the world was in crisis. Expensive oil, uncontrolled inflation, and a shaky global economy. In that context, the leaders of the richest economies decided to meet informally. Thus, the G6 was born. Shortly after, Canada joined, and the group became the G7. The United States, Japan, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, Italy, and Canada. 7 countries that hold almost half of the world's wealth, although with less than 10% of the population. An economic elite that, despite their differences, tries to establish the rules of the global game. The curious thing is that they have no headquarters or permanent secretariat. The G7 operates more like an exclusive elite club, where the richest powers on the planet sit to discuss the fate of the world over coffee and public statements. They talk about climate change, global security, pandemics, and trade, but without making binding decisions. Everything remains as promises, diplomatic gestures, and a key condition that there is political will. And although it has lost weight compared to blocs like the G20 or BRICS, the G7 still has something that few possess: the ability to react immediately and a global megaphone. Because when these 7 speak, the markets listen. The Allied Powers. A sunny morning in June of 1914, in the city of Sarajevo, everything seemed ready for a day of celebration. Decorated carriages, gleaming uniforms, and a crowd eager to see Archduke Franz Ferdinand pass by. But suddenly, 2 shots shattered the calm. Archduke Franz was assassinated. What seemed like a local attack became the spark that ignited a world war. And the most unsettling part is how everyone was already prepared, like pieces waiting to be activated. On one side, the Allied powers were formed by the United Kingdom, France, and Russia. Later, Italy joined, thus betraying Germany. The United States entered in 1917 with an economic and military force that would change the course of the war. Each country had its own interests. France wanted to recover Alsace and Lorraine, Russia sought to protect the Slavs in the Balkans, and the United Kingdom wished to curb German hegemony. Everyone believed the war would be short, but it ended 4 years later with the victory of the Allied powers and millions of corpses on the battlefield. When peace was finally about to arrive, the Treaty of Versailles punished Germany so harshly that 20 years later the world would burn again. The Allied powers in the Second World War were led by the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and China. And despite their differences, Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin allied because they knew they could not win alone. Each faced their own hell, the Soviets in Stalingrad, the British under the Blitz bombs, and the Americans on the Pacific beaches. On the other side were the Axis powers. Behind each Axis empire, there was an obsession. Germany, humiliated after the First World War, sought revenge. Italy wanted to revive the imperial glory of Rome. Japan desired to be the master of Asia. In 1936, Hitler and Mussolini sealed their cooperation with the Rome-Berlin Axis. Japan would join later, forming the so-called Tripartite Pact in 1940. It was not just a military agreement, it was an ideological project of supremacy. The German Blitzkrieg, the Japanese invasion of China, and the fascist campaigns in Africa showed a pattern: rapid expansion, extreme brutality, and total repression. But even among them, there were frictions. Japan and Germany never coordinated joint offensives. Mussolini, for his part, started wars without consulting Hitler, such as in Greece. Despite their differences, they agreed on one thing: there was no room for diplomacy. Their crimes left indelible marks: the Holocaust, the Nanking massacres, the concentration camps in Africa. And although for years they seemed unstoppable, the world responded with a force they never imagined. In 1945, Berlin fell, and Japan surrendered after 2 atomic bombs. But victory did not bring peace. At Yalta and Potsdam, the Allied powers began dividing the world and planted the seeds of a new war, the Cold War, the Warsaw Pact. When NATO integrated West Germany in 1955, the Soviet Union responded with its own move, the Warsaw Pact. This alliance was not just military, it was a symbol of domination. Under Moscow's leadership, 8 countries signed the pact. But more than a mutual defense club, it worked as a tool to maintain control over Eastern Europe. In 1956, the Pact's tanks entered Budapest. In 1968, they crushed the Prague Spring. The message was clear: no one left the socialist bloc without consequences. The ironic thing is that its first major fissure came from within. Albania withdrew in 1968, unhappy with Soviet influence. Over time, the members themselves began to question the alliance, and in 1991, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the pact disintegrated, but its traces are still present in every country that was once invaded by friendly tanks and that today looks warily towards Moscow. The European Union. Imagine a continent where 2 world wars had left ruins, hatred, and hunger. Instead of building walls, 6 countries decided to share their most valuable resources, coal and steel. Thus, in 1951, the European Coal and Steel Community was born. What seemed like a technical economic alliance hid a much greater ambition: to prevent another war between France and Germany. And it worked. Over the years, more members joined, and the community became something much larger, the European Union. In 1993, with the Maastricht Treaty, the European Union acquired its modern form: a political, economic, and cultural union, a flag, an anthem, and a common currency, the euro, but also challenges, migratory crises, conflicts between member states, and the exit of the United Kingdom. Today, 27 countries share institutions like the European Parliament, the Central Bank, and the Court of Justice. And although it sometimes seems like a slow machinery, it is one of the most ambitious experiments of peaceful integration in modern history. The Arab League. When the Second World War ended, 7 Arab countries decided that the time had come to speak with one voice. Thus, this organization was born in 1945, with Egypt as the diplomatic epicenter. Its initial goal was noble: to promote political unity among Arab states, coordinate common positions, and defend the Palestinian cause. But the story would not be so simple. From the beginning, the League faced internal challenges: monarchies against republics, secular states against Islamic ones. Coup d'etat, civil wars, and personal rivalries between leaders complicated any real attempt at unity. Even so, the Arab League was a key player in moments like the oil embargo of 1973, which shook the Western world. It has also served as a mediator in regional conflicts, although with mixed results. Today, it has 22 members and a still relevant mission: to find common ground in a region plagued by differences. And although the most common criticism is its ineffectiveness, it remains the only forum where the Arab world tries to listen to itself. ASEAN. Amid the chaos of the Cold War, with Vietnam in flames and Cambodia on the brink of collapse, 5 Southeast Asian countries decided to do something unusual: cooperate. In 1967, Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines, Singapore, and Thailand signed the creation of ASEAN. And the most incredible thing is this: they did not do it out of love, they did it out of fear. The fear of being dragged by the superpowers and the fear of wars between neighbors. What began as a modest pact to maintain stability is now a network of 10 countries that have managed to avoid armed conflicts among themselves for more than half a century. ASEAN does not have a common army or a single currency, but it does have something equally powerful: influence. It has created free trade zones, attracted investments, and become the bridge between China, the United States, and the rest of the world. It even has its own non-aggression treaty, the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation. It all started with fire. In 1969, an attack on the Al-Aqsa Mosque provoked outrage throughout the Islamic world. It was the turning point. From that crisis, the Organization of Islamic Cooperation was born. 57 countries, from Morocco to Indonesia, decided to form a bloc to protect their religious, economic, and geopolitical interests. Its objective is to strengthen Islamic solidarity, defend the holy sites, and support the Palestinian cause. But behind the religious discourse, there's also politics. The tensions between Shiites and Sunnis, the rivalries between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and the divisions between secularized and theocratic countries have made the Organization of Islamic Cooperation function more as a forum than as a force. Even so, it has launched initiatives in science, health, education, and humanitarian aid. And in a world where Islam is constantly tested in the global debate, the OIC tries to balance tradition and modernity on an increasingly complex geopolitical board: Commonwealth. What was once the British Empire, with the presence in almost every corner of the planet, today survives as a voluntary community, the Commonwealth. Created in 1931, it brings together 56 countries from all continents. Some, like Australia and Canada, still recognize the British monarch as head of state. Others, like India or South Africa, do not, but they all share a history. They were British colonies or dependencies. The Commonwealth has no army or legislative power, but it does have cultural and diplomatic influence. It organizes everything from the Commonwealth Games to educational programs, economic forums, and election observation missions. It is a soft network where the imperial legacy blends with a vision of modern cooperation. And although it has been criticized for its symbolic role, the reality is that many former colonies prefer to remain connected as long as they can speak as equals with the former metropolis. ALBA. In 2004, while the United States was promoting the FTAA, the Free Trade Area of the Americas, 2 countries decided to stand up. Venezuela and Cuba founded ALBA, the Bolivarian Alliance for the Peoples of America, and their objective was clear: not to compete, but to resist. Inspired by the thought of Bolivar and Martí, ALBA presented itself as an anti-capitalist alternative. It rejected the free market, proposed solidarity-based cooperation, and was mainly supported by Venezuelan oil. Projects like Petrocaribo offered cheap oil in exchange for political support. Initiatives like the Miracle Mission provided free medical care to Latin America. but Venezuela's economic crisis weakened its ability to sustain the alliance. Today, ALBA has fewer active members, but it remains alive, not as a commercial bloc, but as a symbol of an ideological struggle that, although worn out, still holds strength in certain Latin American discourses. G77. In 1964, during a trade conference in Geneva, 77 developing countries decided to unite. They did not have nuclear weapons or gigantic economies, but they did have a common need: to be heard. Thus, the Group of 77 was born, today composed of more than 130 countries. Although its name did not change, its weight did. The G77 became the largest coalition of countries from the global south within the United Nations. And although it is not a military or economic alliance, it does have immense power: the vote. With that vote, they block resolutions and push questionable agendas on sustainable development, climate justice, and fair trade. But they also face criticism. It is difficult to maintain unity among so many members with such different priorities. Even so, the G77 serves as a constant reminder. The world cannot be governed by just a handful of powers, because even if they don't make headlines, they are the majority. The Quad, 4 countries, 4 oceans, an alliance without an official name, but with a very clear message. The United States, Japan, India, and Australia form the Quad, a group that doesn't need to sign treaties to unsettle China. Born after the 2004 tsunami as a humanitarian aid effort, the Quad resurfaced in 2007 with another purpose: to balance power in the Indo-Pacific, joint naval exercises, technological agreements, and vaccine cooperation, all under a language of freedom and security. But the interesting part is not what they do, but what they represent. They are maritime democracies aligned to contain Beijing's influence without saying it openly. A movement that is not military in form, but in intention. And although China denounces it as an Asian NATO, the members of the Quad insist they only seek stability. Don't forget to support this type of content by subscribing and watching this other very interesting video that you will love.